This is the In Good Time podcast with Nick Lowe and Andrew Steininger. In this episode, we talk to Eric Morong, band director at Clarendon Hills Middle School. Eric is an alumni of Elmhurst College and current director of the Varsity band at the school. He shares with us some of the decisions he made to take his career from Elmhurst to where he is currently. We also talked about our own personal connections and lessons we have all learned as teachers.
Welcome back, everybody, to the In Good Time podcast. Today, Andrew and I are joined by Eric Morong, an educator based out of Clarendon Hills. He's in one of the middle schools and elementary schools there. He's also an alumni of Elmhurst College and an adjunct faculty at Elmhurst University. So I'm sure that many of you listening to this, Eric is a familiar face.
Yeah, definitely. Eric and both Nick and I know Eric well, but why don't you give us a little rundown of your current situation, Eric, just for the people that might not know?
Absolutely. So like Nick said, I am one of the band directors in District 181 in Clarendon Hills. I teach at one of the 7 elementary schools in that district, as well as Clarendon Hills Middle School. And in terms of how I got kind of started on this path, my earliest musical experience was in beginning band. In 4th grade, that's when I began at Oak Brook Elementary School in Wooddale, Illinois. And for 8 years, that was actually my first gig. That was my first job. I got to
That's cool.
at the same school that I attended, which felt great to kind of give back to that community and to that school district that raised me so well. The interesting thing about how I started is I never have a recollection of actually wanting to participate in band. My situation was I was a very, very disorganized student. So I was one of those kids that would just kind of shove everything in his backpack. After school, I had no organization, no folders. So about every week, my mom, bless her heart, would go through my backpack and help me organize stuff. And then one day she went in my backpack and she pulled out the beginning band permission form. And she asked me, "Hey, Eric, what is this?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a band thing." So she asked me, do you want to do band? And I remember saying yes, but not really a strong yes, just kind of like, yeah, sure, why not? So I never really had the desire to be in band early on. And then my dad took me there because the sign up was that day, like when she took it out of my backpack. So it's one of those funny things where just like one slight change in trajectory can change your whole life. Because had my mom not gone through my backpack, I wouldn't be speaking to you two right now. I wouldn't have the career of my dreams. So I signed up for band, and I remember my first 3 choices were trumpet was my first choice. And I guess I just couldn't buzz my lips, so that wasn't an option. The second choice was violin, which wasn't even an option because we had no orchestra program. So that's how like removed I was from like wanting to be in band. I just didn't know. And then percussion was my third choice, and that's luckily what I was chosen to play because that's my passion. I'm really, really happy I got that instrument. So did beginning band, 4th, 5th grade, Wooddale Junior High School, participated in band there, Fenton High School, and then of course Elmhurst University. The things that kind of tie in my experiences throughout the public education system was the opportunities that were presented to me. And it started from an early age. When I was in 7th grade, my band director was Jennifer Gatto. And Jennifer Gatto presented several opportunities for her students. One of them was student conductor. Now, as Andrew knows, we did a student conductor contest when he was student teaching with me, which maybe we'll discuss later. But that was an incredible opportunity that she presented to me because I had the opportunity to conduct my band as a 7th grader at a concert. When I was in 8th grade, we had a school assembly and she let me play a drum set solo. It was the first year I'd started taking drum set lessons in front of the whole school for a whole school assembly, and everybody went nuts. And then when I got into high school, Garrett George came in. He was my band director my junior and senior year. He presented the opportunity to allow more students to participate playing in the musical. Now, in previous years, the other director, Fred Lewis, who was outstanding, I had him my freshman and sophomore year, most of the people that played in the pit were pros. And when Garrett came in, he allowed me the opportunity to play drums in the musical. So that was a great opportunity for me to enhance my skills and get to play with pros. And then when I went to Elmhurst, Judy Grimes was the head band director at the time. She allowed me to be a student conductor there. So I guess the main tie-in throughout all these experiences is that as a band director myself, now that I'm on the other side of that coin, is I understand that when you present these opportunities to your students, you are sacrificing something. I know that the band under Jennifer Gatto would have sounded better under her than under me. I know that under Judy Grimes, they would have gotten more done than with me. I know if Garrett at Fenton would have hired an actual pro, not a junior who had never done that before, they would have sounded better. But the sacrifices that they made for the benefit of my education and knowing that I wanted to pursue music as a passion and as a career, stick with me to this day. Because I know I'm the same way. I understand I'm a big control freak, and sometimes it's hard to relinquish control of the reins a little bit. But it's worth it for the sake of the students, and it made me the man I am today and the teacher I am. So I always really appreciate all those directors for the opportunities that they gave me. And the first year I started teaching at Wooddale Junior High School, that was my first position. That was the same year I started teaching at Elmhurst College as an adjunct faculty member. So,
I didn't know that.
yeah, yep.
Cool.
So this is my 11th year teaching in general, and also my 11th year teaching the varsity band at Elmhurst University. So
you were like fresh out of undergrad then when they asked you to come back.
I was.
That must have been a really cool experience. So one of the things that I keep thinking as you're talking through here is the sacrifice that comes from the teacher side makes it very student focused at that level. A lot of times you'll see teachers who it's like lesson plan, we have to do this, and this by the end of class. But from what you're saying and having that approach to it, it sounds like in your classroom, you really aim it toward, okay, what is the student's experience and how can I provide that to them instead of how can they meet my goals?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Nick. The way that, well, you guys know one of the main components for how educators are evaluated now is through the Danielson rubric. And basically, if I can kind of wrap that in a nutshell, one of the things that they're looking for is how student-centered can you make your classroom? Like basically the ultimate goal from what I get through that is that the class could run itself. Like if you're not there and you have a sub in there, they could be able to handle it because the expectations are set. It is so student-centered that you provide leadership roles and responsibility opportunities for your students. So yeah, absolutely. From that end of the token, it's important to make your classroom student-centered as well.
I know that the early years of your music career are in the past more so than they are for Nick and I, but do you have any recollection of what it was like, where your head was like going through those transition periods? Like as you got through high school or as you got these cool music opportunities, were you starting to think, okay, now I'm thinking about teaching music, or was it still just like, wow, this was fun. This was cool.
Yeah, initially it was more just this is fun and cool. I remember at the time that band was always just kind of my thing. My parents were amazing because they always provided me opportunities to try things other than band. They let me try every sport I wanted to try, even some sports that I wasn't necessarily like aware of, like I think I maybe tried. They would suggest it. I was a part of every club. I mean, dance club, art club, chess club in school. I mean, I did several things. So that kind of helped me validate that, I've tried a bunch of stuff, including band, and I can kind of say with some validity that band is my thing. It's just the thing that I was always driven to do, but it never felt like work. It was the thing that always made me feel the most successful. So initially it was just kind of like my thing. And there was a moment in high school where a lot of my really good friends that were in band, they all dropped after sophomore year because we all went on a big band trip to Spain. That was kind of like the big band trip. And after that, they all quit. So I kind of realized after, you guys were just sticking through it to get to that trip. But that thought never even crossed my mind. I mean, just because I loved it so much that I didn't really care about. I mean, the trips were amazing. I'll never forget them. But for me, it was just the experience of being in band that there was no thought of ever wanting to quit, even though most of my really good friends had dropped. It just wasn't for them, but I knew it was for me. And in regards to realizing that, hey, maybe I should be pursuing this, my dad and I took out Fred Lewis, who was my high school director from freshman and sophomore year, because my mom or my dad, neither of them went to college. So they were kind of fish out of water in trying to pick the right place to go and financial aid, just everything that entails. So it was my dad's idea to take Fred out to dinner and just kind of pick his brain and see, okay, my son wants to do music, but We're not really sure if he should be a performance major, the education route, the composition. At the time, I was more of kind of like a rock drummer. You know what I mean? Not a percussionist necessarily. So in my head, I kind of wanted to do performance, but Fred was the one that said, look, no one, at least at that time, he said, no one really needs to see your degree. Like if you have the chops, that's kind of all that matters. So if you want to have a more stable career path where you could always play if you want to, you should do something like education. And so I kind of, again, I still didn't really have the education bug at that moment, but I listened to him and I said, okay, well, if he says I can always play, I guess I can always play, and we'll give this education thing a try. And then when I entered Elmhurst my freshman year, I was a part of a band. And my band, it was like an indie rock band. They broke up, you know. So then after the band broke up, I know you'll never hear the way that band sounded ever, but the band broke up. And so then I figured, okay, well, you know, the band broke up, maybe I'll just focus more on actually staying on campus. I commuted to Elmhurst at the time. I lived in Wooddale. So I figured maybe I'll stick around and I'll give this college thing a try, you know, the old college try. And then it started to become my passion. And then what finally solidified it for me that I should be a teacher is when I took conducting one. And at that time, typically you were a junior when you take that. Now I understand you're a sophomore is typically when you take conducting one. Mm-hmm. So, which I like that, by the way, because then for me, that's when I realized when you're actually in front of kids doing the job that I was like on cloud nine.
This is, it's so funny that you say conducting one, because last week when we spoke to Cody Maynor, he had the same thing that he was like, yeah, he knew he wanted to be a teacher, but he was struggling a little bit, and then conducting one kind of solidified it. So I guess for those of you who are listening, if you are an underclassman, particularly a freshman, you know, get through the year, get to conducting one, because we've just heard 2 weeks in a row that is the class that solidifies it. So yeah, that is, I guess, a goal to kind of have.
Yeah. And even before conducting one, I have to shout out to Bill Winters, who teaches at Blackhawk Middle School. Before conducting one, when I was a sophomore, I would observe him teach because it was really close by to where I lived. I knew of him. And so when I would observe him, he would ask me, hey, do you want to get on the podium and just maybe conduct a warm up? You want to conduct a piece? And I never taken conducting one yet. So I did. Again, talking about opportunities, right? There's another one. Like he sacrificed a little bit of his time with the kids for my sake. And because of that's, I guess I should have said that was more like the start before I got to conducting one, just because I really didn't know anything. And there were a couple of times where I actually had to sub for him. There was an actual, you know, substitute in the room, but I would be there just to kind of do the work. And it was outstanding. I absolutely loved working with his kids, and we're still friends to this day. So thank you, Bill, for that opportunity. But yeah, to your point, Nick, absolutely. Then when you take conducting one, that's when that's the closest you've ever been to doing the job that you want to do. So that's kind of when you know. So I'm glad that they moved it now to that sophomore year a little bit earlier, where even though you might not be as prepared as you could be your junior year, at least then you know right away if this is the thing that you want to do or not. And hopefully it is, then you've got more years to keep working on those skills before you student teach.
Yeah, this is really something interesting that I'm seeing a pattern in most educators. And actually, this is an important thing to say about, I think, the way we relate to students too, is that I think every music educator wants to believe that every student wants to learn about music. Well, so like that would be the ideal situation where they just really want to learn how 6/8 works or how to play a major chord or, you know, whatever the thing is. But I think what we see, and even in ourselves in the beginnings of our careers, we see that it's the whole experience of a musical experience is what really grabs a student, and that's what keeps them interested. It's not necessarily that they played the concert F in tune or they played their concert B flat, you know, perfectly stable, or, you know, the what is the tuning app?
Tonal energy.
That's
what I like.
You know, there's all of those activities and skills that are certainly can be enjoyable for a student. But like you said with your story, it was like the totality of it, the whole experience that just you kept coming back for. And only later did you kind of use that enthusiasm for that experience to learn more about it, to learn more how to conduct and, you know, 6/8 and whatever it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it all starts with the feeling, right? Like that's why we loved our band experiences, because like we remember how it made us feel, like being in that room. Like you guys, I'm sure are probably the same, but I couldn't wait to get to band rehearsal. I mean, I'd get there so early just because I loved being there. I mean, I was the percussion section leader at Elmhurst, and I set everything up, and I didn't have to. I just was kind of looking for an excuse just to be there and kind of talk to Professor Grimes and Professor Kellen. And then after rehearsal was over, I would just hang out, just because I loved being there and I loved being with my friends. And obviously when you're in college, you are hanging out with people that, unlike maybe the friends you had in high school, like they actually have the same passion towards you do and the same career goals. So you have more to talk about with each other and more to relate with each other. So yeah, absolutely. It's about the process, less than the product.
Yeah, I'd be curious to ask because it seemed like when we were going through Elmhurst, Andrew and I, the education department had undergone recent changes. So I'd be interested to hear, what was that side of the music education experience like for you when you were going through college?
Because we had like a specific track of education courses that we had to go through that were not music at all.
So for those, I had to take education, I think it was just EDU 100, which I think was intro to education. And then we had to take a class called Students with Exceptionalities, when you learn about students with disabilities, et cetera. And then we had to take a course called Educational Psychology.
Okay.
And those were the only like education specific classes that we were taught at the time. Yeah. Are there more now?
Oh, significantly more. So let's get towards the end of your undergraduate, because there's plenty of career for us to talk about with you. So you're just about to graduate from your undergraduate degree from Elmhurst. You've basically completed everything you need to do. And let's say we're right at about, actually, EdTPA wasn't around for you, was it?
No.
So actually, can you walk us through what your senior year was like, just out of curiosity?
Sure. Yeah, I guess a long time ago. So
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I was, I graduated in 4.5 years. So I student taught the fall of 2009. That was the final year that I student taught. So that last senior year, I remember I did most of the workload early on. So I do remember that senior year, that fourth year that I had at the university was actually really nice because I did most of the legwork already. So I actually had just maybe a couple of classes that I chose to do that I didn't necessarily need to take to satisfy any gen ed or any music requirement. One of them was jazz keyboard fundamentals with Mark Streeter. I mean, that was a blast. And I use those skills to this day. So because of that, because I did the legwork early on, not only was I able to select some classes that I wanted to take, but I got to spend more time getting out into schools and teaching and observing and helping out. And I had friends that, I don't know if you guys have done this, but that we would like trade lessons with each other. Say, hey, I'll give you a drum set lesson if you can give me a saxophone lesson. So it was kind of like the year of my own personal professional development in a way. Just having the free time and knowing that you're this close to student teaching. And while you have maybe a little bit more free time, well, what are you going to do with that time that you have? So I remember that was a really fun year just because I had a little bit more free choice. I always took a J term, so I always got to use those to get some extra gen eds out of the way. And so I remember that being a fun year for me just because I got to focus more on preparing for student teaching.
The way you described your senior year sounds wonderful compared to what we ended up having to do. The education course intensity only got steeper and steeper and steeper as we got towards the end of our career. And the last semester right before student teaching was probably the most intense in terms of education course load and rigor of the class, which now that I'm thinking about it, it's like there's pros and cons because you've got, it kind of puts you through the fire so that you're ready to go out into the teaching world. But at the same time, do you really want students like broken before they're about to go out and teach,
Yeah. And then just out of curiosity, where did you student teach at?
Yeah, so I student taught at Leiden High School, which is the same place that Andrew, I guess, was going to before the pandemic hit. Yeah, with Brian Miller and Tara Capoletti. And Tara Capoletti now is teaching at Glenbard East High School. So I had the best of both worlds between the two of them. I mean, those two educators, like watching them teach together was amazing because they're so different, like personality wise, but together it was like the dynamic duo. Like they just fed off of each other so well. So I'm grateful that I got to kind of have a 2-for-1 deal student teaching at that high school with them. And so that's where I was at first. And then my second placement, I was at Lincoln Middle School in Park Ridge with Mary Ciccatelli. And that kind of solidified my passion to teach at the elementary and at the junior high school level. You know, I mean, a lot of us, that's kind of what student teaching helps us with, is it kind of directs us towards kind of which path do we want to go. I mean, you definitely want to be able to do both, and you want to be marketable enough to teach it either or. But what really impressed me with her was she is a percussionist like myself, and her mastery of all the instruments was uncanny. I mean, she could play all the instruments, and just from kind of from a percussionist, I honestly didn't think that was possible. I just didn't know many percussionists, band directors at that time on that personal level. I mean, every day she would play trumpet, flute, clarinet, trombone, of course, percussion. So that's, I mean, maybe we could talk a little bit about varsity band later, but that just kind of goes to further my hope for every undergrad, especially listening to this, that you should definitely get some hands-on experience playing your secondary instruments, because Mary students played at such a high level. And the reason that they did is because of her knowledge of the instruments. And to me, learning and knowing is doing. Right? Like if you really want to retain the information, you have to get your hands on the instrument, and you have to develop empathy for what your students are going to have to go through when you play that instrument yourself and when they're going to have to. So that's what really, I mean, there are many things stuck out to me from that experience, but that was probably the main one. I just couldn't believe she could do all this stuff. So that kind of set my standard in terms of what teachers should be able to do for the benefit of their students.
Yeah, that's something that Andrew and I have talked about a lot, is on those secondary instruments, especially if you're teaching the younger kids, and you need to know how to do it so that you know how to help them best, where they're going to struggle because you've struggled through it, but also where they're going to kind of cheat the system. Like, okay, I know that when I play flute, my pinky kind of goes down instead of going right above that A flat key. And so because I've done that so much, I can watch out for my kids doing that. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because we've talked about that, a million times so far.
Absolutely. And in one of your guys' podcast, I believe it was the student teaching podcast that you guys did, I listened to that. And Andrew made a comment saying that you recommend that all undergrads try to get as much teaching experience early on in their student teaching career. Like you said, some comment about they should get thrown in right away. And I agree. But the only reason that I did that for Andrew was because I knew that Andrew could play all these instruments. Andrew took varsity band, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 semesters. I think you only have to take it for 2.
Yeah,
so I knew
at least 4.
At least 4. Yeah. So I knew coming in that Andrew had great trombone chops. So I didn't have to worry if I have Andrew work with these trombone players, does he know his slide positions? Can he model a characteristic sound? Like, does he know how to form the embouchure? Because I knew that already. And that's one of the kind of the perks about continuing to teach in Elmhurst and giving back, is because now I continue to keep all these ties. So I've never had a student teacher come in that I've never met before. So we already had that personal relationship, that professional relationship. So in order to kind of get thrown in and establish that trust with your co-op, they kind of need to know what you're capable of, because I would never have Nick work with my flutes if he didn't know the flute fingerings, right? Because that's not only doing him a disservice, but most importantly, it's doing the students a disservice. And then you're just kind of wasting everybody's time. So that's why I was able to do that with Andrew, because he came in and he was already a young rock star, and I trusted him because I knew what he can do. So yeah. So now, whether maybe you're not able to take varsity band, I don't mean to make this like a varsity band, promotion, but at the very least, find ways to learn your secondaries and find ways to maybe get in touch with your co-op early on. Ask if you can observe, ask if you can help out with a couple of sectionals, not just to get the experience, but to show him or her what you can do. So then when student teaching actually starts from day one, you don't have to just sit back or, have to learn how to play the secondaries during student teaching. Put in the legwork, do all that stuff before you get in, because you guys know student teaching flies by like that, right? You really don't want to waste any time having to do stuff that you could have done on your own before you began student teaching. So yeah,
what you just did was provided a perfect segue into jumping into what your first experience as a full teacher, because I believe we said that you started your first real job and you were doing the varsity band at Elmhurst right away, right? As we said that.
Yes.
So can you talk to that a little bit? What was that like? You're a first year teacher. You're basically still learning how to teach. You're at the school that you went to, which I suppose may have made it a little easier because you kind of knew how things went. But just tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely made it a little bit easier. Obviously it's very different being, a
Right.
teacher, than a middle school student. But yeah, you kind of know at least like kind of where things are. I knew many of the teachers that were my teachers back then still work there. So it was really cool to get to work with them and get to call them colleagues. I still wouldn't call them by their first name just because it felt like a sign of disrespect. So that first year, like any first year is tough. Just taking over from anybody that a student has had for a long time can be difficult. At that position, it was a 4th through 8th grade band director position. So the 8th graders there had Mrs. Gatto for 4 years, so they've established a really strong relationship through her, and she was outstanding. So that always makes it tough. When you come in, you don't want to change. You want to try to improve. That's kind of the thing. And I think when I came in, I was almost too far on the change side, which a lot of students didn't like simply because, we're reluctant to change. We don't want to try new things from this new guy. Hey man, we already had a pretty good thing going on like before you got here. So that was the one thing. Had I gone back, I probably would have just taking it easy a little bit more that first year, try to kind of go with the flow and not disrupt so many things that the students were accustomed to doing. It was difficult having to teach the varsity band and beginners at the same time. And there was a period where varsity band was on Tuesday nights instead of Wednesday nights. And on Tuesdays after school, I would have beginning band, 4th grade, and then I would go to Elmhurst and teach them on their new beginning band instruments. So in a weird way, it was kind of like the Twilight Zone because I'd be hearing the same sounds, coming out of vastly different age levels, and then one of the other struggles was like, okay, kind of knowing who's in front of me right now. Like the music education majors at Elmhurst, what I wanted them to know was how to teach these instruments. So I really wasn't trying to treat them like a band necessarily. You know what I mean? Like I like getting ready for the concert, getting ready for contest kind of a band. More trying to focus on, okay, no, this is what I'm telling you. This is why. This is how I would approach it with elementary school students, So trying to kind of change my mindset on that drive over from teaching 4th graders to teaching college students was a little bit tricky at sometimes. I listened to another great podcast that you guys did about work-life balance. And I think it's so great that the two of you are focusing on that now as first or second year teachers. Andrew, this is your first year. Nick, this is your second year teacher?
Yep, second.
Okay, yeah. So, my first year, that was so not in the back of my head. And because of that, I lived at school. That was where I was at. It was so sad that so we had early morning rehearsals, work the whole day, stay after school. I would go grab dinner, like fast food, and bring it back to work just to eat there, just because like I couldn't believe that this is my dream job and I'm living my life. And now, obviously, that when you get old, and I was single at the time, of course. So now that I'm married, and we're talking about starting a family, things start to change and you reevaluate the priorities in your life. So I remember that as a first year teacher, just being so obsessed with my job. And then later on, you learn how to keep that same passion you have towards your job, but just how to manage your time more effectively.
Yeah, this is a great question that we actually mentioned as another potential topic for a podcast is how to kind of the difference between like taking as many opportunities as you can and then or overloading yourself with stuff that's going to impact the quality of your work. So you're maybe a good perspective on this because so your first year teaching, who asked you to do the varsity band thing? Because that's kind of if I were a first year teacher and a college that I just came to asked me to teach a course right after I graduated, I would be on cloud 9 about that.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. So Tara Capoletti taught the class before I did.
Okay.
So that was kind of cool. When I was student teaching with her, we would kind of work together all day at Leiden, and then she would head over to varsity band to direct there, and I would play with her. I would play in the band, while I was student teaching under her. And she offered me the position my first year just because she wanted to focus more on her time in her school, which I don't blame her at all. And so it was a great opportunity. I certainly don't know if I was the most qualified candidate to do it at the time. Just because having to learn how to teach fourth grade through eighth grade plus college at the same time. You know, my colleagues, that was kind of weird. Like I talked about earlier, just trying to bridge that gap. And I mean, a lot of the people in the band that I directed were my age.
Wouldn't you have known some of the people in the band at that time because you had just graduated potentially?
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of them were the same age as me. Yeah, or just a year younger. You know, so that was kind of strange. You know, like having to like, oh, should I reprimand him right now because we're going to hang out later? You know, there's that have an awkward relationship. But since then, and I've grown older, and I've learned how to work with college students better. So it's particularly music education students. I mean, that class has certainly evolved a lot since I've been there. When I started teaching the band, I used to treat it like the third concert band, which I guess technically it is. You know, Dr. Heil does the wind ensemble. Professor Heath does symphony band, and I do varsity band. But really, at least what I like to gear the varsity band towards is making it a lab ensemble for music ed majors like yourselves to learn secondary instruments. So I didn't really have that mentality at the time. I kind of rehearsed them like I would any band. But the problem with that is it was a 2-hour rehearsal. And if you have a non-brass player trying to play trumpet for 2 hours, it's not going to go well. You know, it's not going to happen.
Right.
You know, so just trying to, okay, so how can I make this time more valuable? So that's when over the years I started kind of focusing more on the education standpoint. Like, okay, like this is how I would teach this to beginners. We would have students in the band take turns conducting the band. I would give them all a piece to work on. Most recently in the past few years, I started bringing in guests to speak to the band from anything that I feel like they might not have been getting from their undergrad career. So I kind of used it as like the wild card. Okay, it's like, what do you guys want? What do you feel like you're not prepared for? Let's bring somebody in. For example, I already brought him up, but we just had Steve Nenza in a couple of weeks ago to talk about interviews. And Steve's cool because Steve was a former band director, outstanding band director, who now is an assistant principal. So he kind of was able to talk to the kids about, okay, interviewing, because now it's kind of interviewing season, right? Jobs are opening up all over the place. So he came in to talk to everybody about that. We would have Chris O'Hara, who is now the trumpet teacher at Elmhurst. Before he got the gig, he came in to present a Midwest clinic that he presented just to the varsity band. So getting to use it, kind of a way to break up the monotony of the rehearsal, was kind of nice. So that's where my focus has shifted more.
And credit to you, because I think that I don't know if this was a conscious decision, but that it really speaks to not only giving the students opportunity to learn from different people, but that's kind of a little bit of a masterclass in networking, right? Where you're like, even though you're a teacher and maybe you're in this class, you should always be thinking about where are you drawing your influences from, and where are you getting information from, and where else can I seek to improve myself. So I always appreciated that while I was in varsity band. And, you know, even to this day, for those of you that are just about to graduate, I still go to those varsity band since they've been on Zoom during the pandemic. I've been going to those as an alumni from the varsity band, just because Mr. Morong, Eric brings in such great guests, and they always have something useful and informative to say.
Well, I appreciate that. Absolutely. From a networking standpoint, it's great. We bring in a lot of band directors that maybe undergrads can look at them, present a clinic and say, you know what, I kind of like what she's all about. Maybe I'll observe there. Maybe I'll student teach there. And yeah, and then you build your pool of colleagues.
So one of the things that I got out of varsity band that hasn't been brought up yet is the repertoire, because going into teaching, really you only know pieces of music that you've played before, unless you've done extensive research on it. And so I know basically I stole your list from anything that we did in varsity band. I put it on my, okay, I'm going to purchase this eventually. Most of it is exactly what we played in varsity band. Right now, my band is doing Continental Divide, which I know I played I think the baritone part too, and now I'm having my kiddos do it. So when you first started it, you said you treated it more like just the third band. Did you have them doing more difficult literature, or was it always at beginner level? Or and an extension of that, how did you sort of get your list of pieces that you teach in that class?
It's a great question. So I think when I started, I was kind of your stereotypical under programmer. Yeah, I mean, you guys know picking on music is one of the hardest things about the job, because you get to that halfway point from now till whenever your performance is, you get to, oh God, do I got to give them something new, or do we fight, do we fight through this? So I always lean towards the under programming side of it. So I would pick out stuff that was fairly easy, the kids can feel successful on earlier. And there's lots of benefits to under programming, but as I started teaching on, the cons started to outweigh the pros. And I'll give credit to Dr. Heil, because he pulled me aside one day and he said, Eric, like, I think you really gotta push him. And Dr. Griffin as well, when I was still teaching at Wooddale, when we made Superstate, I'm going to give him big credit to the reason why we got in. He was the one that just told me flat out, said, like, Eric, I can see your kids, they're ready for something harder. He said, I can see it. And I was reluctant to do it because I'm like, part of me is like, man, you don't know these kids. Like, you don't know how much they practice. Like, I'm telling you. But he was right. He was absolutely right. So I pushed them. They loved the music. I mean, we did a Pierre LaPlante piece. I'd never done a Pierre LaPlante piece until Dr. Griffin inspired me to, and he gave me the one that I should try. And it was In the Forest of the King, third movement. And that was one of the pieces that we performed at Superstate. So back to varsity band though, what I kind of started to realize that depending on what instrument they play, like if there's a kid that's playing tuba, and all we're doing is grade 1 literature, all he's playing is like 6 notes, easy rhythms, like the whole time. You know what I mean? So, and he was absolutely right. And again, when you shift your focus more towards, okay, we do a concert at the end of every semester, but it's not really about that because we do one, and then we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, right? It's about the process, especially in an ensemble like that. Everyone knows they're playing secondary instruments. So why would you hold back? So since then, I've started programming a little bit more difficult pieces. I mean, also part of it is knowing the ensemble. You know what I mean? If I have no trumpets, I'm not going to do a piece that features the trumpet, So, and with varsity band, the instrumentation is always fairly small, like 10 to 15, maybe a little over that. So we always have to get fillers to play with us for the concert anyway. So we could always compensate for lack of instrumentation. And now, because of the pandemic, one of the many benefits of it was the class has been online asynchronous all year, fall semester and now. And one of the benefits that came out of that is every week, every student has to submit a major scale and then patterns on that scale. Maybe played in thirds, returning patterns, chromatic scales, and they have to play a band piece in that key every week. And it starts out with B flat major, grade half, and it progressively gets more challenging from week to week. So I think the students are getting more out of it now than they ever have, especially for people that maybe they're a trombone player and they're playing baritone in the varsity band. It's like, well, that's not going to be super challenging for them. So now it kind of helps level the playing field a little bit. Students can submit the scales and patterns at any tempo that they want. They don't have to play the whole piece. I never grade them on how well they sound. It's just about the growth. And like Nick mentioned, it's another great way to expose them to young band and repertoire. When I was treating it like the third concert band, we would only do 4 or 5, maybe 6 pieces a semester because that's all we can handle, for the concert. At least so I thought at the time. But now I give them a new piece every week. So now they're getting double that. They're getting 13 pieces, that they're exposed to by the end of the semester. So it just reinforces that idea of helping them to discover young band literature.
Yeah, this is a great way to segue into your time at Wooddale, because you took that program and took them to that Superstate level. So you started as a first year teacher. Let's just talk about kind of like where your head went along the process there, because like as a new teacher, me being the first year teacher and Nick being a pretty much a new first year teacher, second year teacher, we're still trying to get the sense of what we have to include in our classes to get our students both in the mindset to learn, where they're enjoying the process, but also achieving things where they're not just, having fun for fun's sake. They're actually having fun learning things. So how did you do that going from first year to Superstate?
Absolutely. So in terms like the actual, I guess we'll start from the content standpoint of what and how I was teaching them. I needed to be more fundamentally driven as I taught on. And I remember the moment that I realized what I was doing wrong. And I'll impart this onto you and anybody listening. By my 5th year, that was the year that the students I had started on in 4th grade had become 8th graders. So that means every student in my program were students that I began. So by that point, I kind of thought, okay, y'all know me by now. Yeah, I mean, like it's all me. You understand the expectations. So at that point, I started to place less focus on fundamentals. I wouldn't talk as much about tone quality, blend balance, I mean, even posture. And then there was something about that 5th year where the kids, they just didn't sound good to me. There was something about it. And I couldn't figure it out because I'm like, hey guys, like, don't you know the expectations? Like, and so what that made me realize is that teaching fundamentals never ends. It never ends. You are constantly talking about it. I say the word posture 20 times a day, and not in a mean way. You're just always addressing it. It's something that at that age, maybe even I'm always thinking about that when I play my secondaries because I'm a percussionist primarily. I don't know if you guys are the same way, but like when I play a trumpet, I am always like, all right, feet flat on the floor. Okay, I'm focusing on my breathing. Like I'm always focusing on these fundamental aspects of playing. And that's something that the students need to be able to do as well because they're still relatively new to that instrument. And it hasn't quite gotten natural to them yet. So in terms of like teaching, that's what kind of skyrocketed our playing. I was able to fix it because we had Joel Matter come in. Joel Matter is an outstanding band director. And I just brought him in. He was our judge for IGSMA a few years in a row. And whenever he would get in front of the band, he would do great things. He would be able to fix things right away. And when I brought him in to work with them, all he did was breathing. All he did was fundamental teaching. And again, at 5th year teacher, I thought at the time they could just do it, and he made them sound exponentially better. And that's what kind of hit me. I'm like, oh, Eric, it never ends, man. It never ends. You keep talking about it. You keep reinforcing those fundamentals. Alex Kaminsky over at Vandercook College of Music, he is a huge proponent. He has a great clinic. I forgot the title, but it's all about fundamentals. Anytime he does clinics, he brings these small pieces of PVC pipe, PVC couplings, and just to reinforce breathing the right way. And if you're unfamiliar with Alex Kaminsky, you should check him out next time he presents at Midwest, or he always performs with the Vandercook Band at Midwest. I mean, he is a huge inspiration. Basically, his story, if you guys don't know who he is, he was at 3 or 4 different high schools, and every high school he was at, he took that band to Midwest. So he kind of established this really powerful track record. So then people are like, okay, how could you do this? Like success just follows you wherever you go. And that's one of the main reasons why is because he's such a fundamentally driven educator. Now, and then in terms of the emotional side, aside from the content, when I started teaching, I was a little too far on the product side and less the process side. I wanted to have the best band in the world at any cost. So oftentimes I would rub kids the wrong way. You know what I mean? And part of it's just like you want to take over and you want to show them what you're able to change, what you don't want to do. You want to show them how you can improve. So I was rubbing people the wrong way. There were more kids dropping band that I would have liked to. And on top of that, after 8th grade, there weren't as many students going on to teach at high school as I wanted. So at that point, you kind of reflect and you're like, okay, even if I do have the best middle school band in the world, if they're peaking in middle school, is it worth it anymore? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think so. You know what I mean? Or at least teach them so that if a kid quits, they can look at their younger brother and sister and say, hey, Mr. Morong's awesome. You're going to have a great time in band. It just wasn't for me, but I'm not necessarily sure I was getting those kind of responses my first few years teaching. So, again, as you get older, you just you see things like retention, starts to suffer. And it kind of makes you reflect on, okay, if the band sounds so good, why is there this kind of a weird, strange atmosphere? And it's because I was focusing too much on the product. So because of that, I had to kind of reevaluate. I had to recenter and try to find that balance. And I'm still working on it, boys. I don't have the answer, but it's that perfect balance of having high standards in terms of the performance while at the same time making it a positive learning environment for your students. So that's kind of how my teaching has shifted. And I'm now starting to see the fruit of that labor. I'm starting to see that, hey, you can get the same result through a little more positive reinforcement with your students. Again, bringing up Steve Nenza again, he did a great clinic while he was still a band director about just always looking at the glass half full. So like instead of looking at Nick and say, hey, Nick, that's not how you finger F sharp. You can say, hey, Nick, can you just put your middle finger down? It'd be awesome. You know what I mean? Just like little things like that. Hey, saxophones, make sure I got the finger like so instead of like calling a kid out, making them feel isolated, just little things like that were just things I wasn't aware of. And part of that is who I am. Like I grew up with a lot of directors that led by fear. And now because of that, I was a part of great ensembles. So I thought that's what you needed to do to get that quality of performance, and because that's kind of all that I knew, but not the case. Because then I got to meet more band directors where the kids would just eat the wall for them. They're super nice. They're always there, very supportive, but they also play at a high level. So that's where I've shifted my teaching towards throughout my later years at Wooddale.
Yeah, this speaks a lot to what we were talking about earlier about the student experience in the music program, right? And the reason that they love it, or the reason they continue to do it, was for the whole experience. Something that I just recently kind of discovered teaching my beginners. I'm pretty sure at least 80% of the things that come out of my mouth are questions for my beginners, because to me, if what I want to be able to do is the first lesson that they have, I want to tell them how to do stuff. The second, and like all the lessons after that, I actually want them to tell me how to do stuff. So like almost all my lessons are, okay, let's play this note. Okay, how do you finger that? Is that same note? I almost all my questions are them telling me the information that that I want them to know. And then if they don't know the answer, then we can go and address it. But the thing that I really like about that is it's empowering them to like take command of that information. And then I'm always doing assessments, but they're contributing to the assessment. It's not like I am saying, okay, do this, check, 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 check. It's like, and I play it off like they're teaching me. Like that's how I actively do it in the classroom. I almost pretend like I don't know what the answers are, even though obviously I know all the answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna quote a quote from a man that I know you and I both know, Jocko Willink. When you take ownership of the problem, you take ownership of the solution, right? Like when they have more ownership of it, instead of you just telling them what to do all the time, then it becomes a part of them, and they feel like they are more obligated, and it's just a cool feeling. I mean, knowing that they have that ownership and they have a role and they have a voice in that ensemble. So absolutely, I agree 100%.
One area that you have recent experience with, that all of our graduating future music educators are going to do, is job searching. So you transitioned from your position at Wooddale, which you had a lot of success at, to this position at Clarendon Hills now. So do you think you could just talk to us about some of your reasons for that and what that was like? Now, obviously, it's going to be different because you were an established educator when you made that move, and these are newbies, but some of the thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that drew me to this school district was the program. I mean, Clarendon Hills and Hinsdale, they had a legacy of successful programming. They had an outstanding first of all, their beginning band program was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I mean, I thought I had it all figured out. I took over for Nancy Golden, who is just a legendary beginning band director. And I currently work with Laura Stibich, who is amazing. Kimberly Ferris also works with the beginning band level there. Before applying for that district, I went to their beginning band concert just to kind of see. And I could not believe what these kids were doing. I mean, the level they were playing at the beginning band level, the literature that they were playing was unlike anything I was doing at Wooddale. Again, I think even at that time, I was a classic under programmer at that beginning band level. So that was something that drew me to that program. Terry Melbourne was a huge inspiration to me. If you don't know Terry, he took the band to Superstate several years before I got there. Clarendon Hills Middle School, where I'm at now, and Wooddale, where I was at, we were in the same IGSMA district, which means that whenever we would have band contests, I would see them all the time, and we would hear each other's bands perform, and consistently outstanding performances, very musical, many students in the program as well. That's another thing that drew me to that program. The other nice benefit was, at Wooddale, I kind of started to become an old dog because there was only one band director in that district. I kind of was looking for some colleagues that I can work with. I had some outstanding colleagues at Wooddale, but nobody that actually taught band in the same building. Now I have Rich Lehman, who works in the office right next door, and we could just bounce ideas off of each other whenever we want. George Androkokis, he's another Elmhurst alum that you guys should consider having on this podcast. He teaches.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, he teaches over at Hinsdale Middle School. I mean, he's my best friend. We went to high school together. We went to Elmhurst together, and now we teach in the same district together. I mean, what he's doing over there at Hinsdale Middle School is uncanny. They're so lucky they have him. But yeah, so that was another one of the reasons that drew me there was my best friend. He got the job there before I did, and when there was an opening, he reached out to me saying, "Hey, would you consider possibly applying for this?" So just a bunch of little things in combination led to my decision to wanting to apply in that district, and I'm very glad I did. It's been a great place to work. The support from the top down is outstanding, from administration to the colleagues I work with, to the parent support, and of course to the students that I work with. It has made it a great experience.
When I taught at the high school level, I was at Hinsdale Central High School, and it was really obvious that they had a really good foundation, because then when they got into those upper level ensembles, Matt Karinsky was able to get them to do Philip Sparks dance movements. Did I say that right? Philip Sparks dance movements. Yeah, when they were there, and it was so obvious. So that's really cool that you're now able to kind of help contribute and build that culture there.
Awesome. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we've made it through pretty much most of your career. Is there any thoughts on lessons that you learned of your career before we transition to how all three of us kind of got to where we are?
Boy, so many lessons. I mean, if I had to pick one right now, like for the sake of speaking to hopefully the undergrads that are listening to this, is I wish I would have done more in my undergrad experience. And I did a lot. And everybody watching this knows how hard it is to be a music education major. There's a lot of things you guys have to do. And it feels like, at least since I've been there, I feel like maybe they're just adding more things, like Ed TPA is the big one too. So I don't know if it's necessarily getting any easier. So just being able to manage your time effectively. I mean, there's so many things I wish I would have done when I was still an undergrad. I wish I would have taken more lessons. I mean, I wish I would have observed more. I mean, I don't know how many hours you have to do now, but before it was 150 hours of observation. And like initially it seems like, oh my God, 150 hours. Like, it's nowhere close to enough. It's nowhere close to enough, because you should be doing that all the time, because if you observe somebody, it's a win every time. Whether they do something that maybe you're not into, like their teaching style, well, then you learn, okay, this isn't what I want to do. Or if they do something really good, okay, I'm going to steal that. So every time you observe, you're getting something out of it. So that's the one thing I would recommend to anybody watching right now, is try to get out and observe. And like those opportunities that all those directors presented to me that I mentioned early on in the podcast, try to find directors that might be willing to do that as well. So you're not just observing, but you're actually getting some teaching chops, building that resume before you get to student teaching. So again, it just makes you more prepared, not just for student teaching, but for applying for that first job you want.
And just in case anybody hasn't picked this up already, all three of us have been pretty much linked in our careers. Obviously, Eric is older than Nick and I, but Nick and I both went through varsity band with Eric. At that point, he was Mr. Morong to us. But I, as we mentioned earlier, I student taught with him. What's cool about Elmhurst is what you have experienced, Eric, is that the colleagues that you get from it are going out into the field and are doing things with their careers, which is really cool to be able to build that network. But I just wanted to give us this opportunity to talk about maybe some of the lessons and things that we experienced all while we were kind of in each other's presence. And obviously you and I, Eric, have a little more to talk about since I student taught with you. But I guess to start, we can talk more to varsity band, since it's something that everybody has experienced. I think going back to the playing multiple instruments point, learning multiple instruments. This is something that I've done not only with my doubles, my secondary instruments, but something that I do to this day with skills that I'm always trying to work on, is just do a little bit every day, right? If you can make a millimeter of improvement every single day on something, before you know it, you've got a whole lot of improvement. And the best part about that is it sticks. So for example, my secondaries, trumpet, I play a little bit of trumpet every day, and my range has been slowly getting better and better. But I never would have thought to do that if I, just assumed that I was bad from the start. Oh, I don't know how to do this. I'm not going to get better at it. At the beginning of anything, and I'm sure those of you that are in varsity band or have been through varsity band know this, that first varsity band rehearsal, nobody is good at any at any of them. But by the end of it, you're better. So taking those steps and following your progress as it goes and leaving your ego at the door, because everybody in there is going to struggle. That's the purpose of the course.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I try to, hopefully I do a good job stressing that from the onset. Is you're right, that first rehearsal is pretty abysmal because it's the first time anyone's playing all these instruments together. So making sure that everybody knows that, hey, this is a safe place. It's not about the product. It's really about the process right now. And it's all about learning. It's all about making improvements. And the nice thing is I'll have students in the class help each other out. You know what I mean? Like if I have someone playing saxophone as their secondary and Andrew's in the room, I mean, why would I not ask for Andrew's expertise? Because that's what he does, So that always helps too, is kind of hearing different things from different people as well. And, the benefit of learning a secondary is, I forgot to mention this earlier, is it appeals to different learners. I mean, some people just learn better orally. You know what I mean? Like you could get too physiological about how to form the embouchure or how to articulate. But some kids, man, if I just pick it up and go like this, toot, then they get it, So it's just a great way of appealing to different learners.
Yeah. Something that you just said is something that I am trying to do more and try to make a mainstay of my teaching is whenever I have students in my class that I know I've either taught something to, or I know that they're capable of doing, and another student asks how to do that, instead of me explaining it, I'll just have those other students be the teacher in that situation. And ironically enough, the place that I really figured out that was a good idea to do is I'm actually a middle school track coach now. I do track and field. Track can be really robotic. It's, step 1, step 2, step 3, and music can be that way too. But if you've got students teaching students rather than you, the authority figure, always just delivering information, the students not only getting the information because you're there to make sure that they're getting the right information, but they're also starting to become a band because they're relying on their peers to give them information, and they're building those relationships. And that's something that I'm really trying to get at, building a group of people who are doing music rather than just players.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely aids, I would imagine, in your engagement of the classroom as well, too. I mean, just so everyone feels like Mr. Sanders is not just going to talk to me the whole time. Oh, wow, he's letting me help him out. Because sometimes kids just know the answer, you know what I mean? Or they know what the problem is, but you're just not saying it just because maybe you didn't hear it, or maybe you're not, or they, so some of them are itching to get involved, and some of them are not itching to get involved, but they just don't know what it feels like because no one's picked on them in class yet. So when you finally give them an opportunity, like people gave me, then it instills more of that ownership component that we were talking about earlier. So I love that you do that.
So one of the things, I know we're coming up on getting close to the end here, but I want to make sure that I get the chance to ask you, because we've talked about you and you've had student teachers before, and that you've met them all and whatnot. For people who are maybe listening to this and are thinking they'd like to student teach with you eventually, what are the qualities that you really look for in someone who asks, can I student teach with you?
Yeah, so the number one quality that I'm looking for is just being open to constructive feedback. Just have an open mind, a willingness to learn. That's number one. I've had 5 student teachers from Elmhurst University, and they've all had that, and yeah, there's one. And they've all come at different levels. I mean, some of them had great hands-on experience playing the instruments, like Mr. S over here. Some of them maybe not so much. Some of them, they were better at building relationships with the students. Some of them may be a little more awkward than that. So I'm going to get different people. They have different personalities. They have different strengths, different weaknesses. So as long as you have a willingness to learn, and the thing that makes me flattered is all the student teachers I've had have been through varsity band. So they know me. They've actually seen me teach them. So I'm honored that they'd be willing to spend a whole semester with me all day, every day. So which makes me feel good. So that's pretty much the main thing I'm looking for, is just being open, being willing to learn. I mean, and like we talked about earlier, if you want to make it a more enriching experience, you want to be able to do more teaching, right? You want to get to be a teacher. And in order to do that, if you want to get thrown in right away, come and work with me. You know what I mean? Show me what you can do in the band. I mean, do varsity band as much as you can to learn your secondary. So from day one, I had Andrew work with students, day one. And I said, hey man, for the first week's going to be really boring for you. You're going to be doing a lot of observing. But I think I got into a pinch sometimes where maybe I had a kid come in for a makeup lesson, like a flute player with a trumpet group. And I said, hey, Mr. S, take him because it's a trumpet. And I knew he could play trumpet really well. So that would be nice, but again, if not, I'll help you through it. You know, I mean, just make sure you're being willing to learn the secondaries. I gave Mr. Holt, Kevin Holt's doing teaching with me right now. We got him some loaner instruments. So right now he's learning trumpet, he's learning trombone. He's a phenomenal clarinetist. He has a flute. So he's getting that experience right now. And he was open to doing it. And he'll play with the kids in lessons. He might not sound as good as he wants to at this moment, but he's relentless. He's working on it. So he's willing to learn. He's open to hear the feedback. So I think that's the number one thing I'm looking for. Yeah, of course, showing up on time, professionalism, all that stuff. But I not only do they know me, but I know them. Yeah, I mean, if they're always on time for varsity band, always prepared, focused, ask great questions. So we kind of have that relationship both sides before we start student teaching.
Anything else before we kind of wrap up here?
I just want to say thank you guys for letting me be a part of this. I love that the two of you were doing this. And I told you earlier before we started recording, but I love how you're making this more of an intimate kind of a podcast specifically for your alma mater and for the Elmhurst music education majors. I think that's great. I'm honored to be a part of it, truly. I hope you guys keep doing it. I watched a bunch of your podcasts. There's one more I have to watch. It's the Test of Time one, but everything you guys are doing is outstanding. So I'm going to keep listening. I hope you guys keep cranking these out because you're really helping out your alma mater through doing this, and me as well. I'm learning a ton just listening to you guys talk.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this. And we're flattered that we got you listening and interested in what we've got to share. So before we have you go, if people are interested in reaching out to you, because a lot of the people listening are of course, some of your students in varsity band or at Elmhurst, but for those who are maybe outside the school, if they wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So first of all, I welcome any and all questions, any concerns. If you want to come and observe me, you want to get some podium time, we would love to have you at CHMS. And you can reach out to me through my email, which is emorong, EMORONG at d181.org. emorong at d181.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Not a problem.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.